Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about the NCRB's latest data on prisons in India. We also talk about parliamentary committees and how they are being asked to not talk about cases which are pending in the court. But first, we talk about the NEET and the JEE exams. The Joint Entrance Examination Main, or JEE Main, is an online exam for engineering aspirants, and the National Eligibility Cum Entrance Test, or NEET, is a pen and paper exam for medical and dental courses, and they are both scheduled to take place in September. Both of these exams have been postponed twice this year because of the COVID-19 crisis. The JEE was originally scheduled in April and NEET for May, but students are now demanding that they be postponed further. There are also 6 states that are in favor of this postponement. These exams are important, and their significance for students can't be overstated.
The joint entrance main exam, as we know, is sort of the gateway entrance test for getting admissions to the NITs.
That's Ritika Chopra, who reports on education for the Indian Express.
The main is sort of the first step towards, you have to actually qualify the JEE main exam in order to appear for the JEE advanced. So that's why JEE main is extremely important. The NEET, which is a common entrance test for admission to any undergraduate medical program in the country. I mean, almost all, not everybody, but almost all medical institutes in the country are admitting students through the NEET entrance test.
That's why these exams come with such high stakes. A lot of prestigious institutes take scores of JEE Main and NEET into consideration while deciding to admit students.
To give you an idea of the scale, this year, roughly about 9 lakh students will appear for the JEE Main. And NEET, which is actually the largest national level entrance test, it will have roughly about 16 lakh students appearing for NEET.
But like mentioned earlier, a lot of students are demanding that these exams be postponed because of the pandemic.
The main argument that is being made by the student community is the health risk, that is it safe for such a large number of students to move out on one day, appear for an exam, at exam centers, of course, where hundreds of students would have gathered for the test.
Ritika gives the example of NEET exams, the pen and paper exam, which, unlike JEE, does not happen in shifts.
This would essentially mean that about 16 lakh students are out of their homes on one day. They appear for this 3-hour paper and go back home. So students are asking that whether it's safe for us to do that and why take such a massive health risk, given that even ministers, chief ministers, people in offices of power are not protected from the disease. And if we do get infected, would the government actually pay for our treatment? Because the COVID treatment, as we know, unless, of course, you are not violently sick, but God forbid, if you do fall sick and are seriously ill, would the government actually pay for our treatment? So the main argument being made by the students is that why take such a big health risk to appear for an entrance test?
The other argument being made by students, Ritika points out, is that how would the center and state governments ensure that they are able to travel safely and on time to examination centers, considering restrictions are still in place in several areas in the country, especially in hotspots and containment zones. Students want the exams to take place after Diwali, that is, after mid-November. But the center argues that there is no guarantee that things will be better by then, and any further postponement, it says, would mean losing the entire academic year.
Because if they decide to hold the exams after Diwali, the Higher Education Secretary Amit Khare had told us in an interview that after Diwali, there is a Chhath festival on the 26th of November, which is why the exams then would have to be held after that, maybe in the first week of December, and it would take the government about a month's time to actually wind up the entire counseling process for medical and engineering courses. So if the program actually begins in January, then, it would be very difficult to complete the entire coursework in about 4 or 5 months' time. And that if they start even in November and if they do away with the holidays in between, it would be easier for them to complete the academic coursework for the first year. So the government's argument is that we risk losing an entire academic year if we postpone this exam any further, and that we cannot put so many careers at risk. While the students are making this argument of health risk and life at risk, the government's saying that there are many careers at risk because there are students who have been preparing for this entrance test for almost about 18 months now, and it would be unfair to ask them to wait longer.
When Ritika spoke to teachers, though, they said that since students are anyway being admitted 6 months late, the syllabus will have to be tweaked in a way that they're able to complete the entire course by the end of the program.
So say if you are an engineering student, we would try and ensure that at the end of 4 years, at the end of your BTech program, we would have covered whatever it is that we had to cover over 4 years. So if you'd ask me, I think teachers would know that best. It won't be that easy, to be honest. A lot of semester breaks, all of that would have to be done away with. But it is possible, and it would have to be spaced over 4 years as opposed to, kind of forcing teachers to complete this within the next 5 to 6 months.
The students, in a bid to postpone the exams, had even filed a plea in the Supreme Court. But that got rejected after the court got an assurance from the central government that the exams will be held with all precautions in place.
And the court at that point, as in on the 17th of August, had made the argument which the center seems to have adopted now is that, career of students cannot be put under jeopardy for long. And that if we are gearing up to open up the courts, why can't examinations be held? So that was the argument. And once the lawyer representing the center assured that precautions would be in place, the Supreme Court rejected that plea.
There are, however, 6 states, all opposition states, that is, non-BJP ruled ones, that are siding with the students to postpone the exams. They have filed a review petition in the Supreme Court regarding the matter. These states include Jharkhand, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, Punjab, Maharashtra, and West Bengal. Here is Mamata Banerjee, the Chief Minister of West Bengal, asking all opposition chief ministers to jointly approach the Supreme Court in a virtual meeting that had been convened by Congress President Sonia Gandhi.
Minister can take initiative, Punjab, Maharashtra, Jharkhand, Puducherry, Rajasthan and others. Then we can also jointly appeal. It may be that the Supreme Court may say that we have already given the direction. But sometimes we have seen there are some precedent also that if the problem is there, if the situation is some sensitive, then of course they always give consideration to the people voice, students' voice, because students and youth, they are the future, they are the asset of this country. Let us do it together. Let us go to Supreme Court and let us request them to postpone it for the time being unless the situation allows students to sit for exam.
The review petition has now been filed by different cabinet ministers of these 6 states. But so far, the center isn't backing down, and the preparations are underway so that the examinations can take place with proper precautions. The National Testing Agency that will be conducting both these exams have increased the number of centers, the number of shifts, and has asked students to appear at a dedicated time slot, all to avoid overcrowding.
The entire premises of the test centers would be sanitized. The agency will be hiring cleaning staff for that purpose. Hand sanitizers would be available. In order to ensure that, we're just taking the example of JEE Main right now. For instance, they need about over 6,000 liters of hand sanitizer to ensure, say, about 10 bottles are available at each center at the time of the examination. They need about 10 lakh masks and 10 lakh pair of gloves to ensure that the roughly 9 lakh students and about 1 lakh invigilators would have masks and gloves available to wear during the examination.
All these measures, Ritika says, will happen at an additional cost, around 150 rupees extra per student, which for the JEE Main would come to about 13 crore rupees, according to the Director General of the National Testing Agency.
This would again include the cost of, say, the masks, gloves, sanitizers, in fact, even the extra invigilators that they've had to hire because the number of centers have been increased. So about 150 extra per student. Pre-COVID, it would cost them about 400 rupees per student to hold this exam as per their calculation. But now it would be roughly about 550 per student is what we were told.
As far as the matter of whether or not to postpone the exams or not is concerned, Ritika says that people, even in the academic community, are divided about it.
While a lot of institution heads are saying that, we need to have these exams now because we've lost a lot of time already. There are, for instance, Faizan Mustafa has gone on record saying that it's all right, heavens are not going to fall if we postpone these exams further. So it seems pretty divided. There's the center and the students. I mean, even the center keeps telling us that while you can hear that there is a section of students which is pretty vocal about postponement, there are many who have been writing to us for months saying that, we are pretty tired of preparing for these exams. We've been doing it for about 18 months now. Please hold them. I have had conversations with teachers teaching at coaching institutes who said the same thing, that, our students are pretty fatigued. They've been, kind of preparing and revising. It's been a while. I mean, a majority of their students do want the exams to be held.
And that's the direction in which things seem to be going ahead right now. The exams will take place unless the Supreme Court decides otherwise. And Ritika says that one would now have to see if the precautions proposed for the exams will actually be implemented properly.
Because remember, exams have happened even during the pandemic. States have held their respective board exams. But these would be the first national level exams where students across the country would be moving out simultaneously to appear for these tests. So the logistical challenge is quite different from holding of board examinations. You will require the state's cooperation to ensure that students can move around, to ensure smooth movement. As we know, there are about 6 states which are opposed to the idea. So logistically, actually, it is quite challenging. It's happening for the first time. One will have to wait and watch and see that all the promises that have been made by the center, whether these are actually kept. And on the day of the exam, whether students are able to move around freely, appear for these exams without a hitch, unless, of course, the court decides otherwise. But the center is pretty firm on holding examinations.
Dear listeners, sorry for this interruption, but before we move on to the rest of the show, I just wanted your quick attention. One of the big reasons people say they like this show is because it helps them understand the news better. It provides them with the context they need to see the bigger picture. And there is perhaps no other place that does that better than Indian Express's Explained section. We on 3 Things refer to the section regularly, and it helps us make this show. If you're a regular reader of Indian Express, you know how useful the Explained section can be, especially when you're looking for in-depth analysis by the right experts. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explained and access the coverage 24/7. Explained by Indian Express, where news that matters is explained by experts who know the subject. Now, back to the show. Next, we talk about Indian prisons. Last week, the National Crime Records Bureau, or NCRB, released its latest data on Indian prisons. NCRB is a government agency which is part of the Ministry of Home Affairs and is responsible for collecting and analyzing crime data in the country. The report on prisons reveal a lot about the condition of prisons, our criminal justice system, and who all end up being incarcerated. In this year's report, one thing that stands out is how socially and economically disadvantaged communities in the country get incarcerated disproportionately as compared to the others.
What is reflected in the society is also being reflected in the jails.
That's Deeptiman Tiwari. He reports on corruption and government agencies for the newspaper. And we spoke to him about this prison data.
So the data, in a way, shows that socioeconomics plays a part in how good a shot you have at justice. The data shows, and it is for 2019, that the scheduled caste, who are also called Dalits, while their share of population in India is 16.6%, they make up 21.7% of convicts and 21% of under trials. Tribals, another disadvantaged community, their population in India is 8.6%, but they make up 10.5% of under trials and 13.6% of convicts. Now let's take the case of Muslims. Muslims are 14.2% of India's population, but they make up 16.6% of convicts and 18.7% of under trials. Now, convicts are people who have been found guilty by the court and have been sentenced. So they're serving jail according to the sentence. Under trials are such people whose trial is still going on, where they have not been sentenced. So they're eligible for bail. Ideally, there should be less and less number of under trials in jails. But because of a tardy criminal justice system and our judiciary, people keep languishing in jails without bail. So in the case of Muslims, there are 16.6% of convicts and 18.7% of under trials, which makes it the only community among the marginalized sections of the society where there are more under trials than convicts. In the case of Dalits, if we see, there are more convicts. In the case of tribals, there are more convicts than under trials. Even in the case of other backward castes, there are more convicts. Only in the case of Muslims, there are more under trials.
Deeptiman says that we don't exactly know the reason for this, apart from the socioeconomic factors and perhaps their inability to get bail. And we don't have enough data to show whether or not they are being discriminated against. But their case does stand out.
Now, if we compare the case of Muslims, scheduled castes, and scheduled tribes with that of other backward castes and the rest of the population, which would include non-marginalized sections of various religions, as well as the upper caste Hindus, the trend is totally reversed. Now, OBCs, according to National Sample Survey Organization data, make up 41% of India's population, but they make up only 35% of convicts and 34% of under trials. So lower than their proportion in India's population. Similarly, in the case of others, they form 19.6% of India's population, which is Hindu upper caste and non-marginalized sections from other religions, but only 13% of convicts and 16% of under trials. So there is a stark difference between those who are socially and economically advantaged over Dalits, tribals, and Muslims.
This pattern, though, he says, has remained the same for decades now. When Deeptiman spoke to the former chief of Bureau of Police Research and Development, N.R. Vasan, about this, Vasan pointed to the problem of our justice system.
He says that one, this data reflects the tardy criminal justice system that we have, where the poor have an extremely poor chance of getting justice because they cannot hire good lawyers, they do not understand the law, they're illiterate, which again we'll deal with ahead, that almost 90% of prisoners in India have never been to college, and almost 70% of them have not even passed class 10. So the awareness of their own rights as prisoners is most likely not there. They come from socially and economically disadvantaged background, so they do not have the wherewithal to navigate the tardy criminal justice system that we have. They cannot hire good lawyers, so they don't get bail. So if you look at it, almost 27% of under trials in India keep languishing for more than 1 year. Most of them are for petty crimes because there is nobody to argue their bail, or they don't have enough money to give a bail bond. So these are some of the very simple problems which can be tackled if governments are serious. But unfortunately, that has not been the case over the years.
The other thing that the data highlights concerns women's prisons. According to it, there are over 19,900 women prisoners in the country, but there are only about 31 jails especially for women. And these are only in 15 states and union territories.
And interesting part of this whole thing is that these jails are underoccupied. They have an occupancy rate of only 56% because only 3,000 of these 19,900 are lodged in jails specially allocated for women. The rest, all of them, are in jails, common jails with separate cells for women. So the result is that in certain states such as Uttarakhand, which does not have separate jails for women, there is a massive overcrowding at about 170%. And in states which have these jails, they're underutilized. So somehow this rationalizing needs to happen. Other states also need to have special jails for women. Also, the other problem is that generally these jails are probably in the national capital of the state. So when you have prisoners in the districts, they get lost in the district jails. So we need to have a larger spread of these special jails for women across districts so that they do not have to share common space with male prisoners and there's no overcrowding. Because overall, if you look at it, there is enough space for women in jails, but because of this poor spread of jails and cells, especially for women, there is overcrowding at certain places where there is ample space at certain other places.
Overcrowding is of particular concern at this time when a number of prisoners across the country have tested positive for the virus, making isolation inside already crowded spaces like prisons nearly impossible. Over the years, Deeptiman says the number of prisons have increased, but the prisoners have increased more than that. The infrastructure progress, he says, has been tardy, and which has largely been due to the problem of budgets.
How much money does center or states allocate for making of more prisons or for sanctioning more strength of staff? In fact, even for the currently sanctioned strength, there are too many vacancies in jails across the country. So there is a serious problem. And this problem is largely because there is no intent in either state governments or at the central level to actually solve this problem. Let's take the case of Delhi, which is the national capital, governed by the center. It has the highest overcrowding in the country, again, at over 170%. And there have been many jails constructed in Delhi over the past few years. But obviously, the kind of pace that was needed has not been there. And that's largely because of budgeting constraints. So if we can't have it in the national capital, where else can we expect it?
Another reason for overcrowding, Deeptiman says, is the number of inmates who are under trial. Right now, 69% of all inmates in jails in India are under trial, which, like Deeptiman mentioned earlier, are the ones eligible for bail.
And this is increased over the years. In 2015, this figure used to be 67%. So it is only increasing. Now it is 69%. So instead of quickening the pace of release of under trials, we've only gone slower. So it shows there is something really, really wrong with our judiciary as well as our police systems, which is unable to deal with this serious problem.
Next, we talk about parliamentary committees. Last week, the Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla wrote to the chairpersons of parliamentary committees urging that the panel should not take, quote, those subjects for examination where the issue is pending in courts, unquote. This directive by him has created a lot of controversy and raised questions about the freedom of speech in these committees. In this segment, we speak to Liz Matthew, who reports on BJP for the Indian Express about this controversy. And she first explains what exactly these parliamentary committees are.
Parliamentary committees are considered to be an extension of Parliament itself. In fact, it deals a good deal of legislative business more than what sometimes Parliament do. Because as you know, in both houses, once the session starts, the number of days itself is limited. It's mostly 100 or less than 100 a year only Parliament session made. Then the time for a discussion on a particular bill is very limited.
The decision on some particular bills can go on for hours, but that doesn't usually happen. This is why these committees exist. The committees based on different departments and ministries like education, transport and tourism, or social empowerment are called standing committees. Lok Sabha has 16 and Rajya Sabha has 8 of them. When a particular bill is introduced in the House, it is referred to the concerned committee by the Speaker. These committees meet when the Parliament is not in session, and then they have a wider consultation of the bill.
Then they call the concerned ministry officials as well as experts from outside before the committee to explain certain clauses. So, every member may not be so aware of particular topic. So they can prepare questions and ask them for details. And it is usually function as like non-partisan. There is no whip or anything of any political party. So members across party lines work together. There may be differences, but usually the committees go on majority and they unanimous decisions. They prepare a report with the recommendation to Parliament, both houses. And most of the time, their suggestions are and proposals are accepted by the concerned ministry. And they are incorporated into the bill when it is redrafted and brought to the House for consideration and passage.
Like Liz mentioned, these committees work as a unit despite having members from different parties. But of late, she says, there have been a lot of differences in these committees, especially when the committee is headed by the opposition party leaders, particularly Congress.
And recently what we have seen in the IT committee, Information Technology Committee, headed by Congress MP Shashi Tharoor, the MPs belonging to BJP have been having a lot of differences with Tharoor for every step they have been taking. These differences have taken another turn and became a public spat.
When the members approached the speaker, that's when he came out with the letter in question. In the letter, he emphasized on the confidentiality of these committees. One of the reasons these committees, Liz says, are confidential, unlike the parliament hearing, which one can watch on TV, is so that their discussions can take place more freely. So the speaker had emphasized on that. But the other thing he said was that the committees should not discuss matters pending in the court.
This was the content of the letter, which has obviously triggered a lot of criticism and differences of opinion, not just from the opposition parties, but also from the experts. The concerns are like, one, in the past, there were many instances that the parliamentary standing committees have taken up issues that were pending before the court. For example, the 2G spectrum issue, the coal allocation issue, the Adarsh housing society scam, Augusta Westland scam. All these issues were taken up by the standing committees or PAC while these matters were in the court. And, the experts say, including former Secretary Generals of the Lok Sabha, have said that this matter sub judice. There is no hard and fast rule on that. Of course, you cannot discuss a matter which is in the process of adjudication. But the House is supposed to be a forum or on a floor where freedom of speech is allowed. There is this one book on parliamentary practices, Kaul and Shakdar book. It clearly says that the freedom of speech cannot be denied on the floor of the House. Parliament is supreme. You cannot actually tell the MPs that you should not discuss a particular issue.
The former chairpersons of different committees that Indian Express spoke to also said the same thing. Liz also points out that the matter of sub judice, that is a matter under judicial consideration and therefore prohibited from public discussion elsewhere, is itself under debate now, whether or not it has a place in a democracy like India. Though the other thing pointed out by PDT Achari, former Secretary General of Lok Sabha, when Indian Express spoke to him, was that since these committees are in fact confidential, then there is no chance of the committee's deliberations influencing the court. But now that Om Birla has given this directive, Liz says it cannot be challenged because the speaker's word is the last word on such matters.
But usually what happens is when the rules are cited, when the precedents are cited, the speaker consults the legal expert and sometimes he comes up with another direction. This is the only possibility here we have. But in the case of information technology, because after Speaker's directive, BJP MP Nishikant Dubey has written to Shashi Tharoor saying that you cannot discuss a matter which they said that the internet and telecom services matter in Jammu and Kashmir, saying that it is a matter sub judice. But Tharoor has written to Speaker saying that this matter is already settled in the court, so it is not a matter sub judice. So September 2nd meeting of IT committee, which will be interesting, not just for this, also another controversy which we had seen, that summoning of Facebook officials before Parliament committee, to which some MPs had opposed, that also is coming up on September 2nd. So September 2nd IT committee meeting will be very interesting.
You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargav, and as always was edited and mixed by our producer Joshua Thomas. Before we go, here's another reminder to check out Indian Express's Explain section. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explain and find in-depth analysis by the right experts. It has everything you need to know to understand the news better and see the bigger picture. If you like this show, then you can subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.